That takes serious courage. Where do people like this come from? People who will do incredible acts of courage and sacrifice for their country. I mean, we elect 435 representatives of Congress who do nothing but spend us into oblivion. And they are destroying your economic future. They're stealing from your children simply because they can't say no to every idiotic thing that comes across their desk in their constituencies. It's just unbelievable to me. If we had just a thimbleful of the courage that our founding fathers had, this nation could fix its economic future. But right now, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I'm Douglas Peak, and I am your, what's a great word? Like a little teddy bear salty pastor. Yes, always being so sweet. Oh, a little bit of sarcasm to start the day off. This is the Salty Pastor Podcast designed to coach you up in your faith. And our goal is to coach. And that basically means we believe in your potential. We believe in what God wants to do in you, will do, and can do through you. We also have, I believe, a deep knowledge of the spiritual journey. And that means from a practical standpoint, know what works, doesn't work. I can draw on 40 years of full-time ministry. I can also pull on, as I like to say, my overly educated self, and that is the knowledge I've gained through my master's program, my bachelor's program, and then my doctoral program. So there's that. And so you've got experience, we've got some academic chops there that kind of help out. But most importantly, I think the reason why I love doing what I'm doing is because of the transformation that happens in the lives of people. And seeing that when they are given the truth and they understand it, they make their own choices. And when they make their own choices, that's when their faith grows the most. When they say, I know what I believe and I know what I think, and I'm going to act on that. No more confusion, no more foggy wondering what direction to go. They want to go out, they want to live their lives, and they want to grow in their faith. And so that's why we're here, and I'm just so glad that you are joining us. I want to tell you about a gal named by Alexa Anderson, and she's a high school student in Oregon, and I'm just really impressed with this gal. From a very young age, she's competed in track, and boy, is she a winner. And this year, she competed at Tigard High School, which is a suburb of Portland, and she was one of the top varsity performers, and so she went to the state championships. And while she was there at the Oregon State Track Championships, she won third place in the high jump. So that's really amazing, the third best high jumper in all of Oregon. But what makes her story so interesting is this. There was a young male whom everybody knew who had competed in the same track meets in 2022 and 2023 on the JV squad. He competed on the JV squad because he wasn't a good enough male athlete to compete at the varsity level. And so he decided to start identifying as a female. And in the Oregon State Championship just last week, he won 5th place in the high jump. Same event as Alexa. So when they were handing out the awards, he who identifies as a she and won 5th place came to stand up on the podium with all the other winners. And Alexa stepped off in protest because she believed that he was displacing or taking away from another female athlete. Now, that is what I call courage. She got reamed out for it. During the championship photo, one of the Oregon State track officials told her she couldn't be a part of the photo because she had chosen not to stand on the podium with a male in the female category. Now that is what I call courage. And it's really neat to see young people starting to step up and act courageously in a world that's gone stinking dog nuts. I mean, literally, our world has gone nuts. And yet, it's courage of people that will make all the difference. You know, we've been studying courage, and some of the main principles of courage are this. Courage begins with critical thinking skills. And that is that people who cultivate their courage are people who have learned to think for themselves. I mean, think about Alexa. She had to think for herself. And she came to the conclusion, you know, this is a boy who grew up male and has a distinct advantage over other females, both genetically, biologically, with everything to do with muscle mass and bone structure and height and everything else. And then he decides to identify as a female so he can compete against the girls. She reasons through this and comes to the conclusion, this is not fair. Now, people who don't think for themselves and people who don't have critical thinking skills are unable to come to their own conclusions and then courageously take a stand on them. So that's why courage begins. If you really want to cultivate your own courage and become a courageous person and develop the courageous mindset in your life, work on your critical thinking skills. Ask yourself, well, what do I think about it? Don't ask yourself, well, what does everybody else think about it? You can ask yourself, well, what is everybody else saying? Is what they're saying right? Or is everybody just going along with the crowd? What is the truth here? And critical thinking skills are necessary to cultivating courage in your life. The second principle that we really dug into that I think is powerful is once you start thinking critically, you start to figure out how to align your core beliefs with reality. And I've talked about this in the past, and this is a really interesting principle, but Carl Jung talked about where happiness comes from. And one of his principles that I think is still very salient or powerful today, and apropos, meaning it applies to our daily situation, is that people who have core values and then they act outside of those core values tend to be unhappy. But people who know what their core values are, which is basically your core beliefs, and then you act out of those, you tend to be more happy, right? So that really applies to this situation. The point I'm trying to make is simple, and that is, do your core values align with reality? Because if your core values align with reality, then it's easier to live them out naturally. Does that make sense? What I mean by that is this, is that some people think the world is a certain way and they believe certain things that are false. And because they believe false things, then they have to act incongruent or contradictory to their core values. Because even though you say in your head, I can fly and jump off this building and I can fly, inside you're going to say, no, that's your survival instinct's going to come out and won't let you jump off the building because you believe you can fly. The only people who do that are people who are certifiably crazy, right? Because their brain is not working right. Because the reality of the material world in which you live imprints upon your brain at a subconscious level that you cannot fly. And so you've been a victim of gravity your entire life. And so that imprints on you. And so to act incongruently or contradictory to that is a frightening experience. In the same way, when your core values reflect reality, you can live them out more easily. And that's why it's so important to know God and follow God, because he's an objective truth that defines reality. And his reality is the most accurate description of ultimate metaphysical reality. I know that's an abstract concept, but I hope you can get it. The point simply being is that if you're a pilot, you have to have a thing called an altimeter, because the altimeter tells you exactly how high off the ground you are. And one of the problems with the altimeter that you have to deal with is it gauges how high you are based off various pressures. And so as you go higher or lower, you have to change and you have to recalibrate it a little bit, okay? Otherwise, when you descend, it'll give you a false reading. And there's been accidents chopped up to pilot error based on the fact that they simply didn't recalibrate the altimeter as they were descending. And so they didn't have an accurate reading of where they were at in their altitude. Well, that's basically it, is that are you calibrating your altitude according to reality? And God is the ultimate reality. So finally, we talked about consistency, and it's the need to not only think critically, challenge your own beliefs, but do it consistently over time. And that's where a courageous mindset comes from. And then on Tuesday of this week, we added another little nuance to it, which I think is very important. And we studied Psalms 139. And in Psalms 139, we found out some really fascinating things. The psalm is a song written by David to God, and it's written in poetic language. It's written like you'd write a song. And it's sometimes, it's not an engineering manual that tells you technical data. It's a song. It's expressing emotions and feelings, but that's the way they're capturing a biblical truth. And it ends with, I think, a very profound biblical truth that helps you cultivate courage in your own life, okay? And it says this, verse 23 and 24, it says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me or test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any way of pain or hurtful way in me. Lead me in the everlasting way." So what he's saying is, I want to walk in the everlasting way, and I want to know that. And so, God, I want you to search me, and I want you to help me be very introspective and help me discover things about myself that I need to be more honest about, okay? Let me understand those, God. Now, why is that so significant to courage? Because oftentimes what we do is we are afraid to be introspective, to do a deep examination of our heart and life because we're afraid of what we're going to find there, right? Well, because you are a part of Christ and you've been redeemed, you now have the capacity to be completely honest with yourself without the worry of what you're going to find there, because Christ has redeemed all of it. And this is the one place I believe where following Jesus, being a Christian, is so different than any other belief system out there, whether it be Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, or Buddhism, which represent somewhere between 96 and 98% of the world's population. These are the primary belief systems or religions that exist among the majority of human beings. And Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism do not provide a mechanism that allows you to evaluate your innermost world, your innermost soul, without judgment or condemnation. They teach introspection, but for the purpose of kind of like, judging yourself or condemning yourself and saying that is not acceptable, I need to get rid of it. And so what they're relying upon is something really fascinating about the human psyche, and that is that guilt is a powerful motivator to change in the short term, but it has no long-term positive efficacy or capacity to bring about authentic transformation. And so they're relying on what I would call a lesser principle of human nature for spiritual growth. Whereas in Christianity, it's exactly the opposite. It appeals to the highest and most efficacious or effective transformational aspect of the human psyche. And that is that you are inspired to change based on a vision of who you want to be or what Christ is calling you to become. You see, and that is a massive shift. And that's why Christianity is probably the largest belief system out there, around 2.8 billion people. It could be higher because nobody knows how many Christians are in China or Indonesia. Nobody really knows. All I know is that I believe it was in 1999 or 2001. I can't quite remember. But according to organizations that chart the growth of Christianity, they said that the number of Christians in China surpassed the numbers of Christians in America, which is considered the largest Christian nation in the world. So isn't that interesting? That was 20-some years ago. And it's interesting because things that are coming out of China continually say over and over again that it is growing like wildfire there. So this is why I think, in my opinion, that Christianity is so different, because it allows you to cultivate courage, right, in any given situation. Now, to prove that point, you can look back and look at all kinds of courageous acts throughout history. For example, the founding fathers who birthed the United States of America did something that no nation that was birthed or started has ever done. Every other empire or nation was established through a totalitarian or military process. In other words, it was conquered and established by a king or a dictator from another land. Alexander the Great is a perfect example. His 4 generals, perfect example. Hannibal and the Carthaginians, perfect example. All of the Caesars of Rome. About, I think it was like 46 years before Christ was born, Julius Caesar was executed, betrayed, and killed in the Roman Senate. And he was, the reason why is because he had consolidated power in the Roman Empire, and he became the first, basically, dictator, right, of Rome. And so the actual notion that it was a voting republic or anything after that is unheard of, because even though Julius Caesar was killed, the next guy grabbed the throne, so to speak, and then he became the Caesar, the ruler of all Rome. And so you can go through all these different, Roman Caesars, and they all continually seized power. You look at the biggest issue with Russia. You look back about why communism failed. Well, that's because all of these communists would rise up and seize power, and they'd kill all the other communists that were opposed to them. I mean, it just goes on and on. You can go back to like Charlemagne, who was the second Holy Roman Emperor. He built that whole empire again. There are various Chinese dynasties. You go look at the Ming dynasty, you look at the Qing dynasty, you look at all these dynasties throughout 3,000 years of Chinese history, and they were all focused around a single person who built their empire. There was Genghis Khan in the Mongolian Empire. That you look at the Umayyad and all of the Islamic empires, they were all founded by a single ruler or individual. The list goes on and on and on. I'm not going to keep boring you with all these facts about history, but the bottom line is that the United States of America wasn't founded by an individual. It was founded by 52 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, and they desired to form a country, a nation, on the founding principle of a government for the people and by the people. And out of those 52 men, many of them, a vast majority of them, lost their fortunes. They lost family members. Some of them lost their own lives during the Revolutionary War. Talk about courage. I mean, what incredible courage these men had to be able to not only form a government unlike any other government, but also to fight for that government, even to the point of losing their fortunes. One of the greatest stories that I love is a story of George Washington, because he was a deeply committed follower of Christ, and he became the the commander of the Continental Army. But then what happened is, after they won their independence and the Constitution, they elected him as president. What many people may not know is that all of his undergenerals, all of his military leaders under him said, "We want you to declare yourself king, because we want you to have a new empire here. We want a new American empire." And he said no. He said, "I didn't do all this so I could be a king." He said, I did all this to preserve the notion of democracy. That takes serious courage. Where do people like this come from? People who will do incredible acts of courage and sacrifice for their country. I mean, we elect 435 representatives of Congress who do nothing but spend us into oblivion. And they are destroying your economic future. They're stealing from your children simply because they can't say no to every idiotic thing that comes across their desk in their constituencies. It's just unbelievable to me. If we had just a thimbleful of the courage that our founding fathers had, this nation could fix its economic future. But right now, no one has enough courage to do it. Until the citizens of the United States say, we have enough courage, and we're no longer going to allow people that go there and outspend our income because it's destroying our lives. Sorry, that was a little salty pastor, passionate plea of a need for courage amongst our political leadership. But this is not about history. It's not about our country. Today, I want to talk to you. And really what I want to do is encourage you. Have you ever thought about that word, encourage, right? It's E-N, courage. And in is a preposition which means putting inside. So I want to help encourage you. And I want you to think about the places where courage can make the greatest difference in your life. One of the biggest areas of your life that you need courage is in parenting. Really great parenting is built on courage. You know, I think Alexa Alexandra, that track star from Oregon, I think she was parented by some pretty courageous parents. One of the best things you can ever do as a parent is to let your kids try something and fail. You can't do that as a parent if you don't have courage, right? Letting your kids fail, because that's oftentimes the only way they learn and get stronger. Parenting, really great parenting, is built on teaching kids that their choices and their behavior have different types of outcomes, right? You do make a choice, it has a result. It takes courage to let your kids suffer the outcome of their poor choices. That's really hard because we live in a world where a lot of kids are kind of over-parented by parents who don't want their kids to fail. And that's a problem. Finally, character, and this is one of the most courageous things you can do as a parent. Character is developed in the struggle, never in the easy times. As a parent, what you want to do is you hate to see your kids struggle. You want to take away their struggle. You want to take away their suffering. You want to do everything, to kiss their boo-boo and make them feel better. But guess what? It takes a boatload of courage as a parent to let your kids struggle with things and then figure it out on their own. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, do a little James Bond spying going on kind of a thing. One of my favorite stories is that there was a tribe of Indians, Native Americans, who had a process for young boys that would enter into the warrior class in the tribe. And what they would do is they would send the boy out, and he had to stand in a field all night long by himself, right? So he would go out at sunset, and he would stand in that field, and here's an 8-9-year-old kid all by himself, all those sounds, and he's just scared to death, and he doesn't know if he's going to make it, but he can't cry out, he can't leave, he's got to stay. And then as the sun comes up, he doesn't realize that his dad was standing there at the edge of the field with an arrow knocked in his bow, keeping him safe. He didn't know that. So I think that's a great parenting technique, and that is let your kids struggle. Don't jump in. They don't need to know that you're at the edge of the field with an arrow knocked in your bow because you're ready whenever it gets seriously dangerous. Great relationships, great marriages are built on honesty, right? And transparency. Being honest requires more courage than you could ever imagine. I mean, it really requires a lot of courage. I wrote a book a while back, and I got into a conversation with this guy that he said made a huge difference. The book I wrote was called Authentic Intimacy. It was a 30-day challenge, okay, for married couples. And they're an empty nest couple. And I got into a conversation with this guy, and he says, I just want you to know that we just finished your book, and it has literally transformed our marriage. He goes, in ways that I never knew, understood, or could imagine. He said he and his wife had been married for over 25 years, and they'd raised 3 great kids. They're all grown and gone. And I asked him, I said, well, what do you think was so transformational? And, I don't know, maybe secretly I'm thinking, well, it was the verbiage I used or the insightful things that, maybe I came up with, but it had nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. His answer was so interesting and profound. He said, for the first time in our marriage, I was completely honest with my answers. He goes, we started the book a little bit, and he goes, whenever you do a relational stuff with your wife or anything, I was always thinking, oh, what answer is she looking for? Or I got to give her the right answer, or I'm going to get in trouble. He said, what happened is we got distracted, we got busy with life, and I was kind of tired, and we started the book, and we started doing it together. And he said, for the first time, I don't know why, he says, I was just going to be completely honest with my answers. And he said, that transformed our marriage. He said, I was no longer searching for the right answer. I started just saying what I truly, honestly thought. And my friends, being honest in your communication, especially men, takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. But that is the courage you need to transform your marriage. Another place that is so important is inner strength. Inner strength, that place where you're at peace with yourself, where you kind of are really comfortable in your own skin. Getting there takes more courage than you will ever imagine. Did you know how much courage it takes to dig deep into what you think and why you think it? As Jordan Peterson says, almost nobody thinks critically anymore, because to be a critical thinker, what you have to do is you have to tell yourself a proposition like, I think, that ice cream is nutritious. And then you have to sit there and basically argue with yourself. You have to argue both sides, honestly, and see how you come to a conclusion, because that's the only way critical thinking skills really work. That's why Christianity has a tendency to bring more people peace. I was reading about the professor emeritus from Boston U. He used to teach the Philosophy 101 course. And what he did is he said, I would split the class on day 1 up into 2 groups, those who believed in God and those who didn't believe in God. And he says, okay, I want you to partner up. Those of you who are atheists or agnostic, and those of you who are theist. So they partner up. And he goes, and everybody thought, oh, they're going to make us argue. He goes, okay, if you're an agnostic or you're an atheist, I want you to argue for God in his existence. If you are a Christian or if you're a theist, I want you to argue against God's existence. And you know what he said? He said it's absolutely remarkable, because all the agnostics and the atheists had the most silly arguments for God. He said the best arguments against God were from the Christians. Why? Because they thought critically. And you have to think critically. You have to dig deep. You have to ask why you think what you think. You have to compare what you believe to your core beliefs against an objective standard. And this is a level of courage that very few people ever find in their own lives. And this is why people never find redemption. They never find inner peace. They never find renewal. They never find true satisfaction about their lives. I remember this song many years ago by a singer by the name of Rich Mullins. A lot of people may not even remember who he is. He died in a car accident, tragically, probably 20 or so years ago. He wrote, though, a song. What he did is he took the Apostles' Creed and he put it to music and he called it I Believe. And he just makes all these statements. I believe in God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and his Son. All three are one. I believe that Christ, came to save us from our sins. Just basic gospel truth. And what's really interesting, though, is what I thought he said in kind of the chorus is as he was singing this, he would say, he goes, I am not making it, it is making me. I am not making it, it is making me. Think about that for a moment. Think of the courage it takes for us to set aside who we think we are, what we believe ourselves to be, and willingly submit ourselves to an objective standard, one more than likely shows us to fall short. That takes courage to submit yourself to an objective standard that says you're falling short. You know what I mean? And yet, this is the mystery that unlocks everything about your life. It is only when you have the courage to do this that you find real, authentic, unconditional love in your life. It's only when you have the courage to accept how flawed you really are and then come to that point to experience true freedom that comes from being redeemed. Because even in your most exposed, worst place, that's where Jesus meets you and says, I accept you. You are mine. That takes courage to get there. The most important aspect to grasp a hold of is that developing courage, cultivating courage, seeing your own personal courage grow is so much easier than you think. It's not nearly as hard as we imagine. First of all, anyone who says, I'm just not a courageous person, I can't be, I never will be, that's just simply a denying of the reality, the truth, the objective truth, where God says, I want you to develop a courageous mindset, and I have created the context in which you can do that. I've given you the path to do it. Oh, and by the way, the Holy Spirit is inside of you, empowering you to do that as well. It's not about doing more things or striving harder. It's just about focusing on the right things, and you will grow in your courage. I also would like to say is that there's no excuse to avoid growing in courage because God has given the promise and he's given you the power of the promise. So no excuses. My challenge for you is cultivate your own courage. Start cultivating a courageous mindset because it's then and then only that you're going to see, wow, I am understanding, learning, and knowing how to be a champion in this world. And that the point of my faith is to produce a overcoming, victorious, winner attitude about my life. Well, that's it for the Salty Pastor. Hey, if you can, go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe. We always need that. Share this podcast with your friends, especially if you thought it was helpful. And then finally, go to our website and sign up for that weekly inspirational email. So glad you're with us. And remember, what you believe is one of the most important things about you.